We're talking about a product that you developed. Tell us about what we got going on.
So I developed a product called Strike Assist, and Pete's been helping the last couple of years. And basically, when fish feed, they create suction by opening their mouth rapidly, and they expect the bait to get sucked into their mouth. And when you're trolling, the line tension prevents the bait from moving towards them. And so the Strike Assist has a spring that's calibrated, so when they strike, it allows the bait to get sucked into their mouth, so the hooks go deeper into their mouth, and you're hooking more fish, and they're less likely to get off.
Really interesting. How does it work?
What
does it look like?
So if you think about it like a soda straw, it's about the same size as a straw.
Okay.
So it's a 3/8 inch diameter tube, clear, and it's 9 inches long with a spring inside and a leader coming out the back. And when the fish hits, the spring extends until the leader hits the back of the tube, and then you're fighting the fish through the tube, so the spring can't overextend and get damaged.
Very interesting.
And you just clip your fishing line onto the front from your pole, you add a leader and your lure behind it, and send it.
So, how did you even get this idea? How do you come up with something like this?
So I was watching, I enjoy trolling, and I was watching underwater trolling videos and watching fish strike up to 6 times and never get touched by a hook, and then just turn and swim away. And so I just thought, well, why? And as soon as I asked that question, I have a science background, and I put the two things together, which is fish are suction feeding, and they're expecting that bait to come into their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trying to grab it like a mountain lion or a wolf would. And so that was the aha moment.
Interesting. Yes, so yesterday we were talking, and you were telling me about all the underwater footage that you had and just the different ways that fish bite.
Yeah.
And I found that incredibly fascinating. Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, so not only how they bite, then how they react after the bite too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 2 main ways that fish are going to feed. There's suction feeding, which they're going to do most of the time. If they have a spiny prey item and they suction feed it from behind, which is where they usually approach from behind because the prey can't see them.
Mm-hmm.
If they do that and they swallow it tail first and you have a spiny prey item, the spines will get stuck in their throat. And so when they feel like they're attacking a spiny prey item, they'll swim up from behind and they'll use a little bit of suction to pull it into their mouth. But what they're trying to do is grab it between their upper and lower jaw. And salmon will crush it to wound the bait, and walleye have teeth and they'll puncture it, and then they spit it back out and swallow it head first. So large spiny bait items, they tend to head strike instead of tail strike. And then once they are hooked, if you're fishing with a bait, once they're hooked, the different species do different things. So steelhead just go crazy. They nonstop. They thrash, they jump.
Pete can tell you that without looking at the video, right?
Yeah, but when you see, I mean, it's affirmation of what you know. But when you see the strike and then see what a steelhead instantly does, I mean, when I steelhead fish in streams and all that too, and so I see you hook them and they just start this revolution of craziness. You see why people lose a lot of steelhead, and he had one or two underwater videos on the boat of just instant. As soon as I touched the bait and got it, I'm hooked. Just this whirling dervish thing going on down below, like crazy.
If you lassoed a chipmunk, that's about what it does.
Right.
They just go spastic.
The fight for life, goes wild for steelhead.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Lake trout go dead bug. Once they're hooked, they leave their mouth open, and they just completely dead bug. They're swimming down. You can see their tail working, and they're trying to push themselves down still.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while, they'll do a head shake.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. They don't thrash and go crazy. Walleye will go spastic for 1 or 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of succumb to the fact that they're hooked. And then what's weird about walleye, though, is they'll swim along with the bait with their mouth closed. So it doesn't register on the other end of the rod. If you miss that first hit, they'll just drag along for 5 minutes. And then because I did that because I had dipsy divers that were tightened down too hard. So I had a walleye that I was dragging for 20 minutes, and I got to watch what happened when I didn't realize I had a fish on.
Yeah.
But
They become really easy to reel in, don't they?
you wouldn't know they're there, and that
Right.
was a like a 6-pound walleye, and they are not putting any action on the rod. You wouldn't know that they're there because they're swimming along with the bait, and then every once in a while they'll shake their head again. But after that first couple seconds with the walleye, they just swim along with it.
What about a king?
So like that the affirmation thing is like, as an angler, you're up on a boat, you're up here, and the fish is down there. You can feel that or see it kind of through a rod, but when you see it underwater, it's a bit it's affirmation of what you know and you felt, but you see it then. Kind of.
It's been super interesting to watch underwater because you don't get to see that part of it. I don't have footage from king hits. We've caught plenty of kings on strike assist, but I didn't figure out the camera rig until too late. And then the kings I did catch, the camera the camera itself dies quickly in cold water because it shuts down the electronics. The battery's still fine and the memory card's fine, but you get about 15-20 minutes in that cold water, and then that's it. And I wasn't able to get a king to bite before the camera died, and so I still need to get king, but I've got sheephead and walleye and steelhead on camera. But we've caught plenty of steelhead and browns and kings, cohos, lake trout, sheephead. not on purpose, but we still caught it.
Yeah, and you were telling me that your camera is 60 frames per second.
Yep.
So you literally were timing by frame, like how long it takes for this fish to actually get the lure in its mouth.
Yep. So I like I said, I come from a science background, and so I had researched, published scientific papers, and so I knew that the average fish strike lasts 1/20th of a second. So that's from they swim up behind the bait, they pop their mouth open, and they close their mouth back again. They expect that prey item is now in their mouth in a 20th of a second. So with a camera that's 60 frames per second, you get 3 frames of strike, and then it's over.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it happens lightning fast. And so if you think about it, trolling without a strike assist, when they strike, you have 1/20th of a second for that hook to get in the fish's mouth, because their mouth is only open for that period of time. And the only way that it happens is they have closing speed of the bait, or it's called ram speed. And so when fish are super aggressive, they have a high closing speed with the bait, and so the hook can get in their mouth. When they're super aggressive, the strike assist is less important because they have that high closing speed. But when they're less aggressive, you can watch them swim up and stall out behind the bait and then strike with little or no closing speed, and then you're going to touch them with a hook, or you're not going to hook them at all. And then the strike assist obviously is very helpful in that scenario.
All right. So tell me about the strike assist, and you showed it a little bit, but you kind of get into some details, and it looks like you have 2 different versions here.
Yep.
Okay.
So there's 2 models. So different lures create different amounts of drag force, and then the faster you go, it creates additional drag force. And so if I just had the one model, then if you're fishing something like a crankbait, it's going to eventually bottom out the spring, and there's no room left for it to extend. So then you need to size up to the Model 2. So like the Model 1, I call it a spoon feeder because it's going to be good for spoons. It's good for other things too, like flies and spinning glows, and crawler harnesses at lower speeds. But if you're going to, and then the size 2 is, I call it plugs and cranks. And that's probably the one you're going to be using for things like mag lips and crankbaits, that kind of thing, or mag spoons at high speeds. So I've got a chart on the website, and it shows different styles of lures, and then when you would switch from a Model 1 to a Model 2 based on the trolling speed.
Well, you sound like a very scientific guy, so I'm guessing you'd have a lot of data on what you get out of this. So tell me a little bit about the results of using this compared to just going out there and trolling the way everybody else does.
So I put a lot of time and money into this, And before I did anything, I wanted to make sure that I could prove that it actually worked. There's a lot of fishing products where, like, you think it works, but you can't really prove it. But if you're catching more fish, I should be able to prove it. And so we worked with a group of captains, and they were giving me data and running rods with a strike assist versus without a strike assist on the same trip, and then giving me that data, and I was keeping track of the number of bites they were getting per bait and then how many fish they were landing, and you can compare the data. So we caught 1,366 fish over the last 2 years, and the strike assist averaged 35 or 36% more fish than not using a strike assist, and that was including the first couple versions of the prototypes that had springs that were too stiff because they weren't made correctly by the spring manufacturers. So they're correct now, but basically because they were too stiff, they weren't extending as much as they should. And so the final version now it's correct. So in the last year with these springs, we were there were some trips where we were catching 3 to 6 times as many fish on the strike assist versus without, and there was trips where it was pretty much breaking even, but it averaged 47% more fish with the current prototypes or the most recent prototypes.
And then you also chartered, like you chartered my boat a couple times early last spring, as well as other people's. And I called you the secretary. Like your job was with a clipboard. And we split the half the boat was without, half it was with the strike assist. Everything identical. Like not like plugs over here, spoons. We kept it, scientifically equal, as you would say. And all he did was with the clipboard was observed everything. But he did it with bunch of guys from Lake Michigan as well, right? One guy from Lake Erie, myself, and then Joe from Lake Erie. And so you also did your data that way by chartering boats specifically to collect data, right?
Yeah, we chartered boats, Lake Michigan, 2 on Lake Michigan, 1 on northern Lake Huron, 1 in southern Lake Huron, 2 in Erie, and 1 in Ontario. And then it was a lot of an ask for captains to keep track of all that data, and so I figured I better just go do it myself. So
it's the best way to make sure it gets done right.
Yeah, and then obviously there's so many variables that go into it. Like a certain side of the boat might be catching fish better than the other, and so there's a lot of failure points in that data. Now you get a high volume of data like what we had, and you get statistically significant results. But then eventually what it morphed into was, I want to figure out how can I actually see it happen underwater. And it took a lot of failures in what the camera rig was, but eventually we were able to get a setup where you can physically watch the fish open their mouth, and you can watch the leader extend out of the strike assist when the lure gets sucked into their mouth. We got very few fish on camera when the camera was still alive, so it was very difficult to get that shot, but we were able to get it on 3 different ones.
Very cool.
And that's on the website.
All right, I got a question here from Jim, and Jim wants to know, have you tested this on really deep Chinook fishing?
I don't know what really deep means, but it wouldn't make any difference whether it is deep or shallow. The physics of it doesn't change. I think the deepest that we caught kings, I don't know how deep you were catching kings on it, but I know on the boats chartered, we were catching kings at 90 feet. I don't know. I can't think of any reason why it would be any different to go deep.
Right. Either way, I don't know why that would matter, but ours were caught average 40 to 90 down, 80 down on average, whether it was a lake trout or the kings we were catching. But ultra deep, I don't know if it would have mattered if it was a dipsy out in the abyss with this or a rigger down in the abyss with it, really.
So one of the things that you said is we caught more fish with this.
Yep.
Was it more bites or same amount of bites but just better fish retention, or less bites but better retention? What did that data look like?
That varied through the different prototypes. And something that came up the first year of testing was we had 2 captains that were running them. There was 9 captains running it. 2 of them were just having, like, they were not catching as many fish with the strike assist versus without. And it took a while to figure out why, but they were fishing really clear water with spoons. And what was happening is the spring was deadening the action of spoon, so it wasn't as an aggressive of a pattern. And they were trolling at like 3.5 miles an hour, and they were getting a lot less bites. And so we figured out the spring was messing with the action. So, like, during that first year, one of the captains, he was running 2.2 to 2.5. He was getting a few less bites with the strike assist because of that deadening of the action at that speed. But he was landing so many more of them that he still ended up catching more fish. And so we added a pre-tensioner so you can basically stretch the spring as far as the spoon would stretch it, so that it's not moving the spring anymore, but it can still extend at strike. And so spoons in clear water, you're going to want to pre-tension it, especially over 2.5 miles an hour. But to answer your question, except for that scenario, they're getting more bites and a better landing ratio.
Calvin, is there? We got about 3 minutes left. Is there something I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about today?
No, I guess I'd be curious if Pete, if you want to talk about. I know
I guess,
you've used them, and
yeah, to summarize, I used them for a season and a quarter, I guess. Not every day, day in and day out. But I presented this at our salmon school, and towards the end, we had a little new product feature, 5-minute, 10-minute thing there. And so this was brought up. It raised a lot of eyebrows. It actually raised a few eyebrows this morning with follow-ups, coincidentally. But in summary, like my experience was all positive. My bite to land ratio was always way up. I saw no failures. I saw no difference in a negative way. And to conclude, I'll say I was confident enough to run these every tournament I spoonfished.
There you go.
Last year, right out of the gate.
Yep.
And I saw the results. I kind of hate giving that up.
Yeah.
But it's the truth.
Yeah, we haven't had any failures. It's way stronger than your line or your drag is going to be.
And last year we didn't tap into this. Really, it was probably an afterthought. Fishing was really good in general, but this year, we're gonna incorporate these onto our meat rigs, especially our meat rigs where we don't use teasers, and this will connect right to the back of an attractor with our leader. We're excited to see the results with meat fishing if it really helps the game with meat bites. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. Like, Pete wasn't running them on his walleye charters, but that makes sense. Like, why do an extra step if you're going to get all your fish anyway? Or like if fish are biting really aggressively, they have a high closing speed. The benefit of a strike assist is greatly reduced. It's not going to be negative, but it's not going to make as much of a difference. And that's where we would see it in the data. Like, even within a given trip, you'd start with the morning bite. And the strike assist was helping a little bit, but then the bite would shut down, and then there was trips where the only rods taking hits were the strike assist rods, and the other rods were dead. The fish are still back there, and they're still striking, but the hooks aren't moving towards them, and they don't have any closing speed. So from a captain's perspective, those rods aren't catching anything. They were fishing, and fish were trying to eat, most likely, but they just...
And from a competitive angler, you hear those stories... If I'd had one more bite or got that one fish in, we would have won the tournament. Those stories are repeated every Great Lake, every event, right?
Yeah.
The one more, I think that may be resolved.
Yeah, I think like I like that overall average number out of 1,000 some fish of 35%, and you apply that to a 10 fish day instead of a 13 or 14 fish day. Makes a difference.
When the bite's tough. This is really the key to just helping you get that one or two more.
Right, and for us, when the bite's good, like on Lake Erie, other than the experimental process for ourselves to try these, for our walleye fishery, it's not a matter of if you're going to catch your limit. It's more like when you're going to probably catch your limit on most days. So we didn't incorporate these day in and day out because our fisheries were so good. these are probably really going to pay off when that bite's a little tougher, maybe for the recreational guys that are trying to get 1, 2, 3 more fish in their boat.
Mhm.
And again, in tournament situations, that's the difference usually between a paycheck and a non-paycheck. So that's where I think these are really going to come in and help people,
And
from what I see.
and for someone like me that's not a pro angler, and we might get 5 bites in a day, and the difference between 5 fish and 3 fish is
Mhm.
a big deal.
Right. Yeah.
I think the better of a fisherman you are, the less you might care about losing a couple fish unless you're fishing a tournament.
Mhm.
And then one thing we didn't talk about was rigging. So you can put this on a diver, you can put this on board lines, you can put it on downriggers, sliders. You just have to make sure all you have after the strike assist is the leader and the bait.
Mhm.
You don't want to like to put a snap-on weight after the strike assist. Just clip it in
Yep.
front of it
Yep.
because it will mess with
The spring.
the spring.
And probably the one last thing, Chris, probably the first question I asked him, I said, Calvin, if I have a winning king salmon on a big one, will this break? Will this ever break? And your answer was what?
No, it's not. The weakest thing on a strike assist is the welded ring on the ball bearing swivel. So if you've ever had one of those fail when you're fishing, then that might happen. But I've never had that happen. And I've tested these and broke them on purpose. And those break at about 40 to 45 pounds. And anyone who's trolling the reels will have a drag force of 22 pounds. And so that ring would break at twice the drag capacity your reel has.
Well, there you go, Calvin. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you,
It's
Chris.
fun to have you. If people want to find out more about Strike Assist, they can go to the website. It is strikeassist.com.
Yep.
Calvin, good to have you.
Thank you.